Earlier today, I talked to Senator Bernie Sanders about his race for the presidency. New York Times has written an article about how the Democratic donors are getting together and trying to figure out how to stop him. So I asked a question about that.
Now, you mentioned there that if you don't win the primary, you'll support whoever the Democratic candidate is, and you get asked that question all the time. What I've noticed is that the other candidates don't get asked that question of whether they'll support you. But the New York Times had a very interesting story about how some Democratic donors are going to dinners to work to make sure that you lose. Now, those are Democratic donors, not Republican donors. And now even more controversially, and this is not me, it's the New York Times. They said Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Pete Buttigieg, and Terry McAuliffe were at some of those dinners. Does that put a lie to party unity?
Well, I'll let the individuals you name speak for themselves. But, two things. I think we are going to win the Democratic primary. And I think at the end of the day, we will have the support of Democrats across the board. They may not be, the Democratic establishment and the big money donors may not be excited about a Bernie Sanders presidency, but I hope and believe they will be far more supportive of me than they would be of seeing Donald Trump get reelected.
Yeah, well, I hope most of them. I'm not at all convinced all of them. And if you are a Democratic donor and you're just looking at it from a callous point of view, well, you'll lose all power if Bernie Sanders wins because he's not taking your money. So he's not going to take your call. And so if you want more tax cuts, sad day for you, you're not even going to get Bernie on the phone. But if Buttigieg is in the dinner with you and you tell him, hey, Buttigieg, do this, he'll return your call. So we don't know that Buttigieg would do it for certain, but we do know that, as Joe Biden himself admitted, he said, you give me $250,000. And when you call me after the election, of course I'm going to take your call. At least he was decent enough to admit it. That's super obvious. But I would like to invite the rest of the media to take Bernie Sanders up on his offer. They should ask Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Buttigieg, and Terry McAuliffe, who are named in the New York Times as being at those Democratic donor dinners. Were you at those dinners? Did you discuss how to stop Bernie Sanders from winning? And if so, isn't it true that you don't care about party unity at all?
Yeah, it's just pretty obvious to me. Like when people give money, many of them are just supporting some kind of generic idea of political activism, but a lot of them do just really cherish the access period. Some of them really do. And even the thought that they wouldn't get a phone call back because they have, even if they aren't influencing policy whatsoever, they really do like the ability to say, you know what, I had dinner with Pete Buttigieg yesterday. I had dinner with Joe Biden yesterday, and he remembered me, and it was great. Of course, that's just the vanity of being able to have those dinners. Aside from that, some people do want to influence some policy, and you would hope that that they would have the wisdom to say, listen, I am giving money to the Democrats because I want some kind of democratic change in the world. I want some progressive difference to be made. I just can't give them that benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, so I don't want people to confuse what we're saying. The Democratic donors are humans, so they're in a spectrum of different opinions and ideologies and interests. So are there some Democratic donors that are just doing it because they really believe in certain causes? Yes, there are. They really want to save the planet from climate change. They really believe that gay Americans should have the same rights as straight Americans, bless their hearts, etc. So that does exist. Also, there are people who think that's true, and I love that, and that's why I give the Democrats and not Republicans. But I'd also like to get the tax cuts. And a lot of them will say, I'm socially liberal, but fiscally conservative. What that means is, don't you dare touch my money, okay? So, and yes, and there's a part of the spectrum that isn't about ideology as much as access, because it feels good.
It does feel,
no question.
I'm sure it feels good.
Power, being able to brag about it, etc. right? Taking pictures, playing golf. And then there is the comic.
But that just makes it all the sadder. That like all of this is happening, all this glad handing and money exchange is happening for a photo on a golf course. I mean, even if that's all that's happening, that's sad to me. Because at the end of the day, there's people that they're ostensibly trying to improve the lives of, who don't ever experience anything like that. And those same donors are giving to multiple candidates, because that's true, who might have completely conflicting opinions of what should happen from a policy perspective, but they will have the same damn picture next to Joe Biden, like, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Can I just to finish the thought, Hans, before we go to you?
Go ahead.
So look, but remember too, pictures is sometimes for vanity, but it's also oftentimes for business purposes because it legitimizes you.
Yeah.
Like you hang it up in your office and people go, oh, if he has a picture with Biden, this guy must be really important and I'm more likely to do business with him. And then I just finished the end of the spectrum. I actually thought there probably weren't too many guys who were comic book evil kind of folks who are like, no, I just care about my own interests. But then I met Howard Schultz. And so now that I've seen this guy who we were told was such a wonderful progressive all of our lives. Oh, there's Democratic donors like Howard Schultz who are so altruistic. Then he comes out of the woodworks, comes out from behind the green curtain. He's like, oh, no. I will risk Donald Trump getting elected again and run as an independent if it's Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, because I am economically conservative. Do not touch my tax cuts. Okay, well, apparently some of them are comic book evil.
Okay, so socially progressive but fiscally conservative just basically means like, look, the problems are really bad, but the causes of those problems I'm totally on board with. Because even you and I agree that this is more about an issue of redistribution of power, and it's about an issue of redistribution of wealth for the most part, right? But is there a clear indication that Bernie Sanders, despite the fact that if you compare him to any other candidate anywhere around the world, who you'd be considered a moderate social democrat, but is there any indication that Bernie Sanders is not an institutional threat than Democrats getting together secretly and talking about how they're going to overthrow him or how they're going to combat the Bernie Sanders momentum? I mean, this is a guy who essentially ran last year on a whim just to kind of get noticed and announced his candidacy during his lunch break to 30 people. And look where, I mean, not last year, sorry.
Last cycle.
Yeah, last cycle. And look at him now. Look at where he is now. Look at the impact that he's made. And when it comes to legislation like Medicare for All, when it comes to forcing Amazon's hand to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, these are all significant changes. And it does genuinely threaten the established order, even though they are technically very moderate changes. These aren't crazy, radical, broad sweeping changes, but even that is putting the fear of God in the elites, the 1%, who only care about making sure that the status quo remains the way it is.
Yeah, and so I want to talk about threats to the system because it depends on what you mean by the system. So when Donald Trump comes in office and says, I don't think you should cooperate with law enforcement, and talks about then arresting all of his political opponents, that is a threat to our democratic form of government. When he says we shouldn't have judges, that is a threat to our entire system of governance and the United States Constitution. Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, as Haas points out, is actually pushing for moderate positions that the overwhelming majority of Americans agree with. So Medicare for All polls is 70%. Almost every one of his progressive policy positions polls anywhere between 60 to 85%, including the one that they care about the most, these donors.
Raising the tax on the wealthy.
Exactly, polls is 76%. So now that is not a radical position. By definition, that is a moderate position when 3/4 of the country agrees with it. But it is radical to the elites. So he threatens their corrupt system. And that is why they get together and go, oh, hell no. And unfortunately, now New York Times did a good job of covering that story, credit where credit is due, but the rest of the media go out there, including the New York Times in other instances, and tell you, oh my God, Bernie Sanders, radical, don't do, oh wow. And this guy is so radical, he was against death squads in Central America. And then they will turn around and tell you how great Buttigieg is because he plays the piano. What does that have to do with fixing people's lives? Right? Nothing at all, but Joe Biden is intensely likable. What a likable guy. But watch out for Bernie Sanders. Why? Well, almost everybody on television is also a millionaire. The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.